Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Course.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
So why don't you just start off? We have Jess Russo here with us today. Do you prefer Jessica or Jess? I was asking Allie, and she's like, it doesn't
Either's
matter.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. Why
Yeah.
why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about you? Who is Jessica?
Um, Jessica is a mom of two, teenagers at this point. I work in the food service industry. I actually am in sales now. I have two little Frenchies at home, so I'm a dog mom as well. Um, Otherwise, I mean, I'm pretty laid back. I don't do a lot these days.
Yeah.
I'm just at that point in my life, I guess, where like peace and quiet is so nice.
Yeah. You have like a little bit
Yeah.
of your time back now that your kids are older.
Yeah, we're getting there. We
Oh,
are.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
So how old is Ryan and how old's Polly?
So Ryan is 16 now. She's a junior in high school. We're starting to get ready for prom. It's
I
Yes.
can't
crazy,
believe it.
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, me either. And then Polly is my son. He is 19.
Wow. You
Ugh.
look so young to have a 19-year-old
Well,
child.
I had him at 19, so
Okay.
but
So,
So
thank
tell us
you. I
a
love
little bit
that.
about that. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that and Polly, since we'll be
Um,
focusing some on him.
yeah, so um, having a kid as a kid is a whole challenge in and of itself. I like to think that we did a pretty good job. Polly's always kind of been our biggest challenge. He's a great kid. He's got a heart of gold. He battles a lot of mental illness, however. He deals with ADHD, he deals with anxiety and depression, and the most prominent being he is bipolar. So that has been quite the journey. We started noticing as early as kindergarten that we had some attention and behavioral things to tackle. So we got really lucky and had a great first grade teacher who had previously worked kind of in special education. So she kind of knew all of the steps that we needed to take prior to even asking for like an IEP or a 504 plan. So she really set us up for all of those things. She kind of started conducting observations in our classroom on her own and making documentation of all of that, which led us to be able to be eligible for a psychiatric evaluation, a neuropsych evaluation, which we did come out of with an ADHD diagnosis. So that was helpful because then we at least had a 504 plan in school. So there were some, reasonable accommodations made for him.
And that was in
Yeah,
first grade.
so the process started in first grade. I think we had the 504 plan by like second grade.
Okay.
okay.
Um, Third grade, we started medication. Fourth grade, we really noticed a huge difference. And then, fifth grade and going into middle school, we're starting to hit adolescence at that point. And we're really seeing like the behavioral stuff. He's really angry. He's really verbal and kind of like disrespectful. And, we're getting into fights at school and, kind of being confrontational with authority figures and things like that. So, we started doing some more research. We did a couple hospitalizations. By the time he was 13, we had a bipolar diagnosis.
Wow.
So it's kind of been like one thing after another, right?
Mhm.
And it's so hard, I think, at any age, really kind of trying to determine, what your child is trying to tell you because they don't know how to.
Yeah.
Um, so that was really tough. We were separated by the time he started school. He had a hard time with that. It was really My daughter didn't really know anything different. We separated when she was about a year. So that transition, that back and forth, it was like a piece of cake for her, but he really struggled with that. And then when we knew that he had these diagnoses, we were able to kind of try to help ease the transition a little bit, because we knew that that was a really big, I'll say, trigger, given his diagnosis. So, we tried to focus on things like that. Hospitalizations, some were helpful, some weren't. Um, the biggest problem I think that we ran into is lack of resources within our community. There's tons and tons of mental health advocates and professionals and hospitals. But there's so many factors that come into play, right? Health insurance, for one thing. Not everybody accepts all health insurances. So finding people who will, finding the right fit, not only for the child, but for the family as well, right?
Yeah.
We had a lot of back and forth conversations about medication. That was a really tough struggle, because, one side really wanted to go for it and try anything that would help. And the other side was very cautious and really didn't think that meds were necessary. And so that was kind of a battle in its own self.
Now, are you talking about one side being you and the other Polly? Okay. I didn't know
Well,
if it was
dad's
you
side.
and that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yep. So I mean, I think looking back now, I think it was probably a healthy two-sided battle. I do think that it's good to really see all of the aspects, all of the sides, all of the opinions, and get as much information as possible. We were on one medication at one point shortly after he was diagnosed bipolar. And we noticed a huge difference in his mood and his behavior. But he immediately started gaining a lot of weight. And as a teenager, everybody is so insecure and self-conscious, and you're trying to figure yourself out, and there's hormones running through your body and you have no idea what that means or what they're doing to you, and trying to navigate that without additional issues is one thing. So that was kind of counterproductive, because then he became so self-conscious, and he didn't, want to go swimming, and he didn't want to, go with his friends when it was too hot out, and, things like that. So it just was a constant adjustment, constant trying to learn, trying to figure out what works best. And then you kind of get to this point in their lives where you don't get to make the decisions anymore. And even based on age, at a certain point when they become teenagers, the doctors really do start heavily listening to the child as opposed to the parent. That was a huge frustration for me, and I really struggled with that, because Polly didn't want treatment. Polly didn't want to be on meds as a teenager. He just wanted to be like the rest of his friends who didn't have to deal with these things. And he knew what to say.
He's
For the
smart.
doctor. Yeah.
He is
He's
a smart
not.
boy, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't make the greatest choices, but he's smarter
Yeah.
than he leads us to believe.
Yeah.
He would know what to say. So that
To
was
get out of taking the medication. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
to get out of taking the medication, or to get out of like further evaluations or further
Okay.
treatment.
So like he
or
told
things
them
like
what
that.
they wanted to hear, basically, like that he was feeling fine, he didn't have mood like okay.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay.
So that was really tough, on top of resources being limited,
Right.
then to kind of not be heard as a parent, was really difficult, right? And then you try to find this balance too of, and this is all throughout the process of, what is 100% related to the illness,
Yeah.
and what is us taking advantage of having a disadvantage because we know and we've learned these things, right? And that was a very big struggle for us too. He now is 19.
Mm.
We have not graduated high school. We have not gotten our GED. We don't work. We're pretty consistently getting in trouble, and we've been unmedicated for 3 years. So, now at this point in my parental journey with him in particular, it's this total loss of control, right?
Yeah.
Not that there was ever full control as much as we want to think that there isn't. But now it's trying to find that peace within myself of knowing I did all of the things that I could. I took all of the steps that were available. And praying that he figures it out, really.
Yeah.
That is
So
so hard.
circling, it's so hard. I can't even. I couldn't then and I can't now.
I know. Poor Ellie's
I-
watched me go through this journey for so long.
I love you. My heart goes out to you. But
Oh.
so one, I want to say you have always, from the second I've met you and I've heard about Polly, you've handled it with such grace. And I like just watching you, and you're very black and white about it, which I love. You're very much
Hard
like,
not
well,
to
this is
be.
what, yeah. But I think a lot of moms would blame themselves, and you're not, which is great because it's not your fault and you shouldn't be blaming
But
yourself.
don't
So
think
I'm
that I
proud of you.
didn't, because it's very hard not to, right? Like, I
Yeah,
learned
for
very
sure.
early on in this journey that, in addition to making sure that Polly was getting treatment and Polly was doing therapy and Polly was taking the meds and things that needed to help him, even just get through the day, let
Yeah.
alone be successful throughout the day. That if I didn't, to some capacity, take care of myself, I was incapable of taking care of him or his sister, who really, thank goodness for her, she's a fantastic kid and she's such an old soul and she really has never needed much. So thank goodness we had that balance with her. But it's, you have to. And I know that I did all of the things that I could, but I always am questioning, like, is there something else that I missed? Is there something else that we didn't know is available? Is there something new that's available now that maybe we could entice him to try?
Yeah.
Seeing this young adult by age try to navigate this journey on his own because he doesn't want to believe that there is a problem. Especially in bipolar disorder, what happens is they take meds for a while and then they start feeling better. And then they think, I don't need these meds because look, I'm doing just fine. When really what's happening is the meds are working. So that's where we've kind of been for the last 3 years is, he thinks that he's just fine without them. However, anybody who has watched this child grow up and, seen the journey that he's been on can see that he's not just fine. He's not even accomplishing the basic, the bare minimum basic things to be a functioning member in society. And it's so hard to watch and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I mean, I've definitely known a couple people with the medication, with bipolar that, they think they're like cured or,
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it's so hard.
So what are you doing now for yourself to handle this? Because that's a lot to handle.
I mean, it is. It's hard. So, I mean, at this point, I'm also at this like very strange point in my life too, right? Where, I am approaching my 40s and I have friends who are single with no children. I have friends who are just getting married and having children. I have friends who have teenagers like myself. I have friends who are becoming grandparents. all kind of around my own age group. So it's, it's really kind of leaning into the relationships that you have that are solid and healthy, right? Like I've had to do a lot of eliminating over the past couple of years because I have found that like I need that inner peace and that inner solitude. So like whatever it is that I have to do to come to that, that has to happen. We as mothers and as women, I think, are so naturally drawn to putting everybody else first. And I did find out very quickly, on this journey with Polly, during that, my dad passed away suddenly. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, who was my best friend. And then we lost her a couple of years later. It's been like one thing after another. And then, all of this with him. So, during that time frame of so much loss, like I had to come to the realization that if you don't take care of yourself, you're useless to everybody else.
Yeah.
And I could see it in my job performance. I saw it with everything. And, so I got myself into therapy. I went through, trying to find a medication that would help a little bit, whether it be for anxiety or depression or whatever, and I went through all of these things and nothing worked. So, fun fact, as women, lucky us, right? Because that's just how life works. I learned just under a year ago now that I actually have ADHD and have just been misdiagnosed my entire life, because generally as women, we don't physically display the symptoms.
I have ADHD too.
I
It's
think
so crazy,
I
right?
think
So
I
like
probably do too. I've never been diagnosed, but
it's so wild, right? Like they finally put me on a stimulant and it was instantly like life changing. Like day one, right? Like my mind got quiet. It was insane, the difference. And it was so exciting, right? Because that also made a huge difference in finding the things and making it a point to find the things that would keep me in a healthy space so that I could help my children and my friends and my family or whoever else, may need me. But that has had to be a really big focus. And I've put a high focus on it, especially within the last year or so.
Yeah, that's amazing.
huge.
Yeah.
I want to circle back real quick, Jessica, to when Polly was young and first getting diagnosed. So with the medication, was this like a hard decision? I know you said you went back and forth with your ex. Like I come across a lot of parents, they'll be talking like, well, my daughter was diagnosed with this or this, but like we don't know what we should do. Should we do medication? Is that bad? Like how did you and your partner end up deciding these things?
So, I mean, we talked to several different people. We talked to, more than one pediatrician within our office. We talked to his therapist at the time. We talked to the school psychologist. Anybody really that could be related to this, to try to kind of get feedback. We also, are of the age group that when stimulants first came out for ADHD, like they were very minimal, right? Like it was Ritalin. And, we had family members within our own families who we saw how terrible that was for them, right? Like you go from being this like fun, loving kid who is a little out of control, but to like nothing, right? Like your soul is gone. So, I was definitely afraid of that. And, my ex was more afraid of things like that. I just was at the point where I was like, anything that can help this kid, right? Like what's the worst case scenario is we try it and we don't like it and we stop. We did try, a couple other meds that weren't stimulants, that had, less side effects, things like that. And, we found them to not be effective. And then, so it was, it was a process of a couple of years between diagnosis and starting meds. And we just kind of, continued to pay attention to his behaviors. How is he acting in the classroom? How is he acting, when he has free time with his friends and, in the cafeteria and recess, and how is he at home? And, the more we saw it kind of escalate, the more we kind of got to the point where it was like, we've tried all the other things. Like, we
Yeah.
have to at least give it a shot.
Yeah.
Now, you
Okay.
mentioned having family members on Ritalin and stuff, so
Mhm.
probably ADHD or ADD,
Right.
but is someone else in the family bipolar or any sort of mental illness?
So, I mean, there is for sure. We see it more, in like our parents' age group, but our parents are also of that age group where that didn't exist.
Right, you
Um,
don't talk about that
Yeah.
then.
and correct. And even if it did, it wasn't spoken about, right?
Right.
So like we can look back and see, within our families, like, oh yeah, this one definitely probably was at least dealing with depression, if not more, or,
Yeah.
whatever. But there's not a paper trail, a documented paper trail of that.
Yeah.
So that becomes a little bit difficult too when you're talking about your family history, because we're just at this time frame where a lot of things have been discovered during our growing up period.
Right. We're so much more aware of these things.
Absolutely.
And I think we're more apt to speak out about them too. Like when I was a kid, you didn't say you couldn't focus. It didn't matter. You just focus, right?
Right. You just do it.
Right. But
Yeah,
it wasn't that easy.
No, I was just talking to my sister. Her and I are both diagnosed with ADHD, and she's more hyper than I am. But when I get fixated on something, I'm super hyper about that, and it's wild. But we were just joking around because my whole family makes fun of me, and I have like the weirdest symptoms of ADHD. Like I have food aversion still as an adult. I mean, Jess, you've seen me eat, like girl, and it's a hot mess. And Taylor's like, you just got to get over it. I'm like, Tay, trust me, it's so annoying. If I would, I could, girlfriend, but like I can't. So I can't imagine, like
Right. And it's so easy for
and no
someone to
one
say
told
that, right, Allie? Like, oh,
right.
just get over it. It's like someone that has OCD or something like that. It's like you can't just
Right.
stop doing that. Like
I
it's
wish,
something in your
right.
brain. Yeah.
But you never I never realized till super recently, like within the past year, that food aversions even has to do with ADHD.
I didn't know
So I'm
that.
sure,
So much related.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
gosh.
Okay, I
There's
didn't
so
know
many things
that.
that I've learned. Yeah, I didn't either.
Why does it have to do with ADHD?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I have
I'm gonna
severe
have to
food
look that
aversions
up.
and
That's so interesting.
yeah, it's oh man, I wish I could change. I've seen an
Well, and
occupational
it's
therapist
so
about it and it didn't help.
yeah.
Still here, still weird.
We all
Still
also
weird.
have our own little quirks that just can't
Yeah.
be
Oh, of
explained.
course.
So
I
there's
mean,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
It is what it is.
It is.
But what I'm saying is there's so many things that I'm maybe Polly had too that were affiliated, and it was kind of annoying. Colton also undiagnosed, but for sure has ADHD, and he has major food aversions. And I find myself getting annoyed with him. Like I'll cook what he asks for and he will start gagging and he won't eat it. And I'll get so mad. Like, I just spent an hour cooking. You need to eat. And then I think, well, Allie, you literally aren't going to eat the same food for the same exact reasons. Like, get over yourself and stop. So I can't imagine having multiple things that Polly is going through where they might all be related, or maybe one has to do with the other, and you don't even know, and you're getting mad at him, and he's like, well, what am I doing wrong?
Right. Well, and that is, and that's the thing, it's that is you can accept that you did all of the right things and or that you at least made the attempt, right? Like you put the effort in, like you did what you could to advocate for this child. But you go backwards and you think, right? Like you're always gonna hold some sort of guilt. You just have to be able to accept it and kind of carry on, I guess. But I think about the fact, right, that I had been misdiagnosed my whole life. So my mom had put me into therapy when my parents had split up for the second or third time. And they had labeled me depressed and having anxiety. And, we started trying meds back then. And, again, nothing ever worked. I only ever got the negative side effects from them. So I would stop taking them. And, I didn't want to do that. And then I would go through these periods of being super depressed again. But, when I finally did my interview for ADHD, you know, they ask all these questions and you go back and you're thinking about it, right? And you're like, oh my God, this
Very
explains
eye-opening.
so much.
Yeah.
And then you think, you know, especially in my situation with Polly, I sit here and think, and I'm like, you know, had I known when I was a teenager that I had this, I could have been more mindful about, you know, like what the triggers were and what bothered me and like what set me off and, you know, what I could deal with and what I couldn't deal with. And maybe I could have seen all of this sooner with Polly, or maybe I would have been able to at least relate or understand what he was trying to communicate through to us through his behaviors, because I would have been able to recognize it.
Yeah.
Where thinking all of these years that I just was immune to medication.
Right.
Like I had no idea what was going on, but now I sit and think about it and I'm like, oh my God, this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But I think that's life, right? Like you have to go through it and experience it, and then you look back and you're like, well, I know more now, and I wish I had known that then, but that's not
Right.
how it works, right?
Right.
And it sounds
Yeah.
like, I mean, Polly got diagnosed at a pretty young age. Now, did all these things, like, so the bipolar and the ADHD, it all happened at different times?
Yeah. So
Okay.
ADHD was definitely the first thing that we noticed. And that diagnosis has stayed consistent, you know, and then it was, you know, they thought that he had depression and anxiety. So now, and Allie, like, you'll be able to understand this too, right? Like when you have ADHD, if you're not treated properly, it triggers anxiety. Like I learned through my process that, you know, because I was starting to have like, I wouldn't say full blown panic attacks, but I could feel it in my chest and I'm like, oh my God, what's bothering me? Like I couldn't even figure out what was going on. Right. So I talked to my doctor about it, and it's like that usually indicates that you need a change in med, either a dosage change, or you might need to switch because you've been on the same one for too long. So like knowing that now after the fact, like I probably would have questioned the anxiety diagnosis in conjunction with the ADHD, but I had no idea.
Right.
So, you know, it's things like that. And then we got to the point where we were doing a couple hospitalizations because not only was his behavior so bad, but he had displayed signs of suicidal attempts. So at this point now we're like, okay, there's obviously something more extreme. And again, like he took our separation very hard. He had a hard time with the back and forth. You know, in the beginning, he had a really great relationship with his stepmom. Afterwards, you know, when they kind of started building their family and stuff, her attention, you know, had to be on the younger kids, obviously. So their relationship kind of fell apart, and, you know, that took a pretty big toll on him. So, you know, we were just seeing like the mental illness side of it be like really, really exacerbated. And it took, I think, his second hospitalization, maybe second or third. And they ran a new evaluation on him, and they were like, you know, it is early to diagnose him this way, but all of the symptoms are that like it is black and white. There's no questioning it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes again, you know, this balance of like trying to find the right meds and trying to find the right therapy style and the right person. And, you know, it was just, it was really hard. Yeah.
So,
And
oh, go ahead, Allie.
all while dealing with this, you have Ryan. So
Right.
how is she handling this, and how are you handling it? Because I know even with something like Colton with ADHD, again, I'm diagnosed, but yes, my anxiety is through the roof sometimes. Like sometimes I don't even want to leave my house. Like he can be a handful and a half. And then it's like my oldest is like, Mom, I want to go, or I want my friends, or I want this, or and I'm like, Lainey, sister, let's realize there's a lot going on here today, and today's just not the day to be bringing him in the wild. So so how did you deal with that, or how do you still deal with that?
I mean, you know, so it's another challenge that you have to kind of figure out, right? So I mean, luckily Paul and I both had, you know, a pretty good support system. You know, my mom and I shared a house for the majority of the time when they were younger. So if I had to deal with Polly, like she would take care of Ryan. You know, we would always kind of make sure that they were getting equal attention. What becomes difficult, right, is the difference in the type of attention that they're getting. So, Ryan doesn't have these challenges, right? So Ryan is able to concentrate. Ryan is able to do what she's told without repeated instructions 4, 5, 6 times, not these reminders. Um, she doesn't give you the behavioral challenges because, again, like, she also isn't needing these reminders. So she's not getting annoyed with you. You're not getting annoyed with her. They're different children. So that then starts to become a problem, right? So he starts to notice that. And now it's, well, Ryan's your favorite. Like, Ryan has it so much better. Ryan this, Ryan that. Well, no, that's not true. She's just a different kid. Unfortunately, she doesn't have these struggles. So things are easier for her. Yes, and it became so hard for Polly to see that, like, all of the things that we were doing, even though they were challenging and they were not always fun, and they, took him away from his friends and things that he wanted to be doing, they were for his own good, right? Instead, he was kind of feeling like it was some sort of like punishment or consequence for something that he couldn't help. And it's so hard to get to change somebody's mindset, right? Even after all these years that we've gone through these things. So he became very jealous of her for a while, a little bit later on. Now, when all of this stuff was kind of just starting, Polly was kind of losing that relationship with his stepmom. And Ryan had a great relationship at that household. So, he was feeling like really jealous of her there, where then, my mom and I were kind of trying to like overcompensate with him a little bit so that he was feeling like some of that positive attention, right? So that's where the challenge becomes, trying to find what we're dealing with in respect to, is it the diagnosis or is it a behavior?
Because of,
And right. And like, how do we find that, right? Because regardless of your diagnosis, this boy knows right from wrong. Like, so where do we find that balance and how do we figure that out? So it became things like that, right? So Ryan was seeing, again, earlier on, later on when he started to get into his teenage years and she got a little older, she definitely like saw the light. But earlier on, she would see us being like so much more tolerant of Polly and his behaviors than at dad's house. And she definitely had some animosity about that. Because, she's kind of viewing it as him being difficult just because she doesn't fully understand it either. She's 3 years younger than he is. So she doesn't fully understand the capacity and like the impact that these diagnoses have on him. She's thinking that we're letting him get away with bad behavior. So that has been kind of a whirlwind too, right? Like, I had a really hard time in feeling like, because I was helping my son and feeling like that he didn't have the support that he deserved. So I was trying to make up for that in doing so I was losing my daughter.
So tough.
Which to an extent, like, I was, I mean, her and I had a lot of conversations about it. Which, maybe why she is so mature and so good. But I didn't want to hide the things from her either. They were a part of her life and they were impacting her life. So I wanted her to have more of a clear understanding of like what these things meant. Like, some days was Polly being a big fat jerk. Yes, he is. You're not wrong, sister. However, it's not that all the time. And we're all trying to figure it out as we go, right? So luckily, as she kind of progressed into middle school, she did start to understand that a lot more. And she's my best friend. Like, she's the best thing.
She's amazing. She's
She really is. She's so great.
And she's in high school, right?
Yeah, she's a junior this year.
Okay. Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, so she, but it was a challenge for her too. And that was so hard for me, right? Because I feel like I'm losing my son to these things that like nobody has any control over. And like, we're trying to do everything we can to like save him and just make sure that he can like survive life and be somewhat happy. And like kind of pushing her away by doing so. It just,
impossible.
ride.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So
Well, I guess it's
hard.
not impossible. It shows that you did it, right? So you're
We did
showing
what we
everyone out there
could.
today you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what
Yeah.
can you say to the women listening today that might be going through some of these challenges? Like, what are some of the biggest takeaways you took from your journey?
I mean, the biggest thing is you have to advocate for them because they can't advocate for themselves, right? So, you know, at this point in our journey, like, did all of my hard work pay off? No, it didn't. But I am still hopeful, and I'll forever be hopeful that at some point it will. And I won't stop trying. Do I give him more space now than I had in the past? And do I kind of lay off? And have I changed the way I deal with the bad behaviors and things like that? Absolutely. Because at this point, he knows what he needs. He knows that he needs to be in therapy. He knows he needs to be on meds. He knows he should have a job. He knows that he's not doing the things, but I can't force him. He has to do these things on his own. Like, legally, there's nothing I can do anymore
Yeah.
except for try to continue to encourage him to do what he should, right? So that's what I do. But you have to advocate for them. You have to take care of yourself because this journey will put you in the grave if you don't. Like, it is crazy and it is hard. And, you have to do those things. That's that. And do your research. Like, don't just buy into the first thing that you're told, right? Like, if your child is diagnosed with something that you are unfamiliar with, go on Google, join any groups that there are, right? Like, I had found a couple support groups on Facebook of parents of children with bipolar disorder, right? And I'll say that I didn't really contribute to those groups much, but just like reading through the posts, right?
Yeah.
Of like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, somebody else's child does these things too. Like, how are they handling it?
Yeah.
There are support groups. I mean, I was a little more reserved than, going and joining those kinds of things, but therapy made a big difference. But doing your research is huge. And on the medication too, right? Like, you don't have to accept any of these things as soon as they're presented to you. Go home, do some research, ask other people, ask the other professionals that you're involved with, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, get the school involved, get the county involved if you have to, get your doctors involved, like, do all of the things because it's only going to help you too, right? Every single one of these professionals that we have crossed paths with have made sure to not only do what they can to help us in our journey, but to also reassure us as parents, like, you're doing everything you can. Right. But the only thing that we can do, the only thing that any of us have the power to control is ourselves. Right. Like, no matter what I do, I can't control what he does or the choices that he makes. Do I hope that it gets better? Of course I do. And I'm always going to be here to support him in any way I can. Unfortunately, right now, that is him having to learn these hard lessons for himself. But that's the biggest piece of it. Like, if you know that you're taking all the steps, you're doing what you're supposed to. Like, and beyond that, it is what it is. So, like, don't beat yourself up, get all the support you can, and don't stay quiet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's good advice.
Thank you so much.
You're going to help so many moms because, like, I don't, even with Colton, as simple as just ADHD, like, sometimes I feel so alone and people don't know what you're going through, or like they judge you like, oh, he's wild. Like, yeah, he's wild. Somebody help.
Well,
Like, it's
I
tough.
think Megan said it
So you're such
earlier.
a helper.
Yeah, I mean, I think Megan said it earlier. How did you phrase it? I don't know, but it's, the biggest challenge with mental illness and things like ADHD, right, is people can't see it, right? It's
Yeah.
not a broken arm that's casted.
Right.
It's not, you broke your foot and you're on crutches. Like, we know that injury exists. Anybody who can physically see you can see that you have an injury, right? And there naturally going to do things to help you, like open the door to make your life easier, or, grab that item off of the shelf so that you don't have to. You can't see the things like ADHD. You can't see bipolar. So it's so much harder for other people to understand it.
Yeah.
So
It
you do
is.
feel very alone because
Yeah.
it's not obviously recognized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing this, Jessica. I'm
Of
sure it's
course.
hard to
Thank you for
share.
having
And
me.
obviously, we wish you the best and Polly the
Oh,
best. We'll be
thanks.
praying
Thank
for
you.
you for sure.
Thank
We'll
you
have
so
to have you on in
much.
like a year for an
Yeah,
update.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
that. Sounds great, girls. Thank you so
Yeah.
All
much.
Thank you
right.
for
Thanks,
being
Jess.
here. Have a great day,
Anytime.
girls.
You too.
All right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.